Europe and Russia Lesson 14, Supranational Cooperation in the European Union. Introduction. Have you ever traveled from the United States to another country? If so, you know that crossing international borders is more difficult than crossing state borders within the United States. You likely had to stop and show your passport, and you may have traded your US dollars for a different type of money. Now imagine that you're in Europe, crossing the border from France to Germany. You do not have to stop to show your passport, and you use the same money in both countries. The main difference you notice after crossing the border is a change in language. People here are speaking German instead of French. People today travel easily between many European countries because of the European Union, or EU. The European Union is a supranational organization with 28 members as of 2018. Supra is a Latin prefix that means above or over. The government of the European Union stands above the government of its members. Because it is supranational, the EU has been able to remove barriers that once made travel and trade between European nations complicated. In addition to having open borders with each other, many EU nations use a common form of money. While EU countries use supranational cooperation to work towards shared goals, they remain separate countries. These countries are united in certain ways, but divided in others. In this lesson, you will learn about the forces that work for and against supranational cooperation in the European Union. The essential question for this chapter is, what forces work for and against supranational cooperation among nations? Over on the left, or on the right, we have two maps showing Europe. The highlighted countries are members of the European Union as of 2018. The map on the left represents things that unite the EU countries. The map on the right represents things that pull EU countries apart. Keep these maps in mind as we read and try to answer the essential question, what forces work for and against supranational cooperation among nations? As per usual, here are the geoterms that we will be looking at throughout this lesson. We have centrifugal force, which is a force that divides people and countries. We have centripetal force, which is a force that unites people and countries. Common market, which is a group of countries that acts as a single market without trade barriers between member countries. And supranational cooperation, which is a form of international cooperation where countries give up some control of their affairs as they work together to achieve shared goals. The geographic setting. Europe is a region that consists of many people and its countries. Throughout the continent's history, certain forces have brought its people together, but at the same time, others have pulled them apart. The force that brings them together, or unite them, are called centripetal forces. The forces that divide things, or move them away from one another, are called centrifugal forces. The European Union was formed to unite countries that had repeatedly been torn apart by war. For much of its history, Europe has been a battleground. During the first half of the 20th century, European nations were devastated by two wars that also spread to other parts of the world. Both wars were so widespread that people now remember them as World Wars. World War I, which began in 1914, was a bloody conflict that lasted for 4 years and caused the deaths of over 21 million people. World War II broke out in 1939. On one side of the conflict were the Axis powers, Germany, Italy, Japan, and some other countries. The Allies, Great Britain, Soviet Union, the United States, and their allies, opposed the Axis. World War II was even more deadly than World War I. It lasted 6 years and claimed the lives of 50 million people worldwide. The fighting left European cities, industry, farms, and railways in ruins. When the guns finally fell silent in 1945, Europeans wanted to make sure that such horrors never happened again. On May 9th, 1950, a French leader named Robert Schuman made a famous speech in which he put forward ideas for bringing a lasting peace to Europe. These ideas led to what is now the European Union. Schuman suggested that France, Germany, and other European countries work together to manage their coal and steel production. If these countries learned to cooperate, he said, they would not be so likely to make war with each other. 6 countries, Belgium, France, West Germany, because at this point, Germany is split into 2, West Germany and East Germany, Italy, Luxembourg, and the Netherlands agreed with Schuman. By 1952, they had all ratified a treaty that formed the European Coal and Steel Community and created a common market for steel and coal products. In a common market, countries reduce or remove trade barriers such as tariffs. Tariffs are taxes on goods that cross country borders. By 1958, the same 6 countries created the European Economic Community, or the EEC, which then removed trade barriers for all kinds of goods. The EEC came to be known as the Common Market. Over the years, 6 more European countries joined the Common Market. In 1993, the Common Market was renamed the European Community and became one of the founding institutions of the European Union. The main goal of the European Union is to promote peace and prosperity, which means economic well-being. The EU works toward this goal by seeking to create jobs, protect citizens' rights, and preserve the environment. It also has programs to promote freedom, security, and justice for its members. In 2018, the EU had 28 member countries spread across Europe, with several other countries hoping to join. However, the United Kingdom began the process to leave the EU in March 2017. Before 2004, all of the European Union countries were in Western and Central Europe. In 2004, 10 new member countries put Eastern Europe and more of Central Europe on the EU map. 2 more countries joined in 2007 and 1 in 2013. The European Union promotes cooperation among member countries. So here we have a map of Europe in 2018 with the European Union countries. So we have original member countries, those are what is in green, and you can see Germany is split into 2. We have Western Germany and Eastern Germany. Excuse me, they started in 1952. They were the original 6 who joined. The purple ones are countries that joined anywhere between 1973 and 1995. So we see a lot of purple countries joining in afterwards. The pinkish orange are ones who joined in 2004. And then the yellow 3 are countries joined in 2007. If they have the little Euro sign underneath them, so we see Finland way up here at the top, 1995, it has a little Euro symbol. That means that they use the Euro, so if you were to travel between any of those countries, you wouldn't have to change money. So we don't have to change between francs and go somewhere else and get dollars. The year, that's the day that they were admitted, we can see the United Kingdom. So we come, boom, over here, United Kingdom, this is England area. They joined in 1973, but they have a little asterisk, and this map says that they are scheduled to leave in 2019. Well, if you pay attention to news that's going on, if you heard at all last year something called Brexit, means British exit. That was, they were voting, people who lived in the United Kingdom were voting on if they wanted to stay in the European Union or if they wanted to leave. So in summer-ish 2019, 17.4, million people left, or they voted to leave the European Union. And at 11 p.m., January 31st, 2020, the United Kingdom left the European Union. Economic cooperation in the European Union. In the United States, people move freely across state borders. For example, some work in one state but live in another. In Europe, before the European Union, citizens did not have a similar freedom to move between countries. National laws made it difficult for citizens of one country to live or work in a different country. Before the European Union, each European country had its own policies about who could live or find work within its borders. Each country had its own currency or type of money. Additionally, individual countries charged tariffs or taxes on goods imported from its neighbors, making these goods expensive for citizens to buy. Today, many members of the European Union work together towards shared economic goals. Many centripetal forces promote such economic cooperation, but at the same time, centrifugal forces work against unity. The creation of a common market was an important economic force and united the European Union. This single market benefits EU consumers in several ways. With goods moving freely across borders, people have more choices about what to buy. The elimination of tariffs on European Union goods had lowered prices for EU consumers. The common market benefits workers as well because they're able to travel freely to other EU countries to find work. The introduction of a common currency in 2002 has also helped unite the European Union. My goodness. The common currency, called the euro, has replaced the national currency in many European countries. The euro makes it easier to travel and trade across the European Union, so people traveling in Europe no longer need to change money when they cross most borders. By joining their economies, European Union members have also created a powerful trade bloc. A trade bloc is a group of countries that act together to increase their influence over world trade. Hundreds of millions of consumers live in the EU trade bloc, making outside nations eager to do business in the EU. The size of its market has made the EU trade bloc an important force in the global economy. Here we have a graph comparing the gross domestic product, or GDP, of 5 economic powers circa 2016. This graph compares the GDP of the European Union and several large countries. GDP is the total value of goods and services produced in a place. By joining together, European Union members have far more economic power than they would have if they acted alone. So we can see that if we had split up these 6 places in the European Union, they would not have been anywhere close to being number 2, just behind the United States. European Union countries share other economic goals. The EU works to create jobs, develop resources, and make improvements that encourage trade. For example, the EU has spent large sums to upgrade highways and to help farmers modernize their operations. Other forces work against economic cooperation. EU members do not always agree on the many issues they face, nor do they always see eye to eye on how EU money should be spent. In general, the Western European members of the EU are wealthier than those in Central and Eastern Europe. In an effort to bring all its members up to the same level, the European Union spends large sums of money on projects in its poorer nations. Some Western Europeans object to so much EU money being spent outside their own area. Economic differences between EU members create other strains. Generally, workers in Western Europe are paid higher wages than those in Central and Eastern Europe, but living costs are higher in Western Europe as well. These factors have led to some Western European businesses to move manufacturing to poorer European Union countries. Costs are lower there, and they can pay workers less. As a result, workers in Western Europe worry about losing jobs to poorer European Union countries. Wage differences also encourage workers in poorer EU countries to move to richer ones in search of jobs. Workers in the wealthier countries often resent these immigrants. They also fear that too many newcomers from poor countries will decrease wages for everyone. There are centrifugal forces at work in the use of the euro as well. When the euro was first used in 2002, 3 European Union members retained their own currency and continued to make their own decisions about money. Members that have joined the EU since then must demonstrate that they have reached certain goals before being permitted to adopt the euro. These goals aim to support economic stability and responsibility. See the map in the previous section, which showed countries using the euro. As you can see, both centripetal and centrifugal economic forces are at work in the European Union. These centrifugal forces prompted voters in the United Kingdom to decide to leave the European Union, and the government began the exit process in 2017. There have been movements to leave in other countries as well, but these nations have decided that the economic benefits of supranational cooperation currently outweighs the cost. Political cooperation in the European Union. Before the EU was formed, there were many political divisions among European countries. Each nation was independent, setting its own individual policies. Nations could choose to work together, but they did not have to. As you've read, political conflict was often more common than cooperation. The European Union encourages political cooperation among its members, in part through its common European Union government. This government does not replace the governments of individual member countries. Rather, the EU government is supranational. It operates above the governments of its members. All member countries participate in the EU government. We have a picture on the side that says the capital of Europe in quotes. The European Union government works on issues shared by member countries. Many of its institutions, including the Council and the Parliament, which is pictured above, are located in Brussels, Belgium. By 2018, this was the center of government for more than 515 million people in 28 countries. Because of this, some call Brussels the, quote, capital of Europe. Okay, so how does the EU government unite Europe? The European Union government works in 2 ways to unite Europe. First, it brings its members together to address issues they all share. For example, it tries to take a common approach to environmental problems. Second, the European Union encourages Europeans to think of themselves as citizens of Europe. European citizenship operates on top of citizenship of a home country and gives individuals certain benefits. For example, citizens of member countries can live and work anywhere in the European Union. They can also vote in EU elections. They have these rights no matter where they live in the European Union. So that's like saying if we had citizenship of the United States, but we also had citizenship of North America, and therefore we could travel and work in US, Canada, or Mexico, and we wouldn't have to worry. The EU government has several important bodies. The Council of the European Union, the main legislative body for the European Union, consists of national leaders from each member country. The Council establishes the overall goals for the EU and proposes new laws. The European Parliament is the largest EU body with 751 members directly elected by citizens of EU countries. Like the Council, Parliament is a legislative body that passes European laws. Parliament and Council also share the job of approving the EU budget and therefore determine how money should be spent on various EU projects. The European Commission, the executive body of the European government, is made up of commissioners appointed by member governments. The Commission proposes new laws to the Council and Parliament and handles the day-to-day business of carrying out EU policies. It also ensures that members abide by EU treaties and laws and takes those who violate the law to the EU's judicial branch, the Court of Justice, if needed. The EU government helps unite Europe by speaking with one voice for all of its members. Within Europe, the EU focuses on shared issues such as transportation and the environment. Beyond Europe, the EU works to strengthen Europe's role in the world. By working together, EU members have more power in world affairs than any single European country would have by itself. In these ways, the European Union government acts as a centripetal force in Europe. There are centrifugal forces at work as well in the European Union government. When a country joins the European Union, it is expected to give up some power to the EU government. This means that the country must carry out EU decisions even if it does not agree with a given policy. This has been a problem for many EU members. Some want to continue to make independent decisions in areas like defense, foreign affairs, and immigration from outside the EU, especially when they disagree with European Union decisions on these matters. The growing size of the EU is also a centrifugal force. By 2018, the EU included more than 515 million people in 28 countries. As the size of the EU has increased, so have the differences among the EU's nations and peoples. The increased number of countries and cultures had made cooperation more difficult. For example, in recent years, EU members have been divided over how to handle the increased number of migrants from regions affected by war, such as Syria and Iraq. Finally, the idea of European citizenship has been hard for some Europeans to embrace. Some people feared that their national identity will become lost in the push for a more united Europe. For them, the advantages of political cooperation may not be worth the costs. A 2017 survey found that nearly 70% of people view themselves as EU citizens, and more than half feel attached to the European Union. Representation in the European Parliament circa 2018. The European Parliament is one of the main bodies of the EU government. The people of the EU vote for its members in elections held every 5 years. Countries with more people have more representatives. So here we have at the top, this is what it looks like. If you were to walk into the European Parliament, this is what it would look like on a normal day-to-day basis. They all got a little desks, and that's pretty much their assigned seat. The bottom shows where each country sits, who is a part of the EU, and how many and the number below the country title name is how many members of parliament they have. So just like the United States' House of Representatives, where each state in the United States has different amounts of representatives based on population, the same is said for the European Union. Also, remember that the United Kingdom is no longer part of the European Union, so there's 78 people straight out of there. Cultural cooperation in the European Union. In 2000, students across the European Union participated in a contest to create a motto for the EU. These students submitted more than 2,000 possible mottos. After considering the entries, the EU announced its choice in 2003, United in Diversity. The words in this motto are important because the goal of the EU is to unite Europeans in an ever closer union. Since the EU began, it has worked toward a common European cultural identity. At the same time, the EU recognizes the diversity of its members and sees diversity as a strength. The word diversity refers to all the ways in which people are different from one another. Areas of diversity may include language, religion, ethnicity, beliefs, traditions, and values. These aspects of culture are what makes each member country of the European Union unique. A common cultural identity is a centripetal force. To help make EU countries united in diversity, the EU has made it a goal to encourage a common European cultural identity. One way the EU encourages a European cultural identity is through the use of common cultural symbols. The European flag, which shows a circle of 12 yellow stars on a blue background, symbolizes unity. It was originally created by the Council of Europe, which encouraged all European institutions to adopt the symbol. When the EU formed, it also used the flag as the official emblem of the European unity. Another symbol the EU has adopted is the European anthem, which takes its melody from Ludwig van Beethoven's Ninth Symphony. When used as the anthem, it is always played without words in the universal language of music. Europe Day is another symbol of European unity. Europeans celebrate Europe Day on May 9th, the anniversary of when Robert Schuman first proposed a supranational European organization in 1950. Europe Day is a time for Europeans to come together to share and celebrate their common culture. The EU also supports cultural programs. One example is the European Union Youth Wind Orchestra, which brings together young musicians from across Europe. Also, each year the EU chooses 2 or 3 cities to be European capitals of culture. The EU sponsors special shows and events that highlight that city and its culture. As you have read, open borders and the euro make travel easy within the EU. As Europeans freely move between EU countries, they come to view Europe as a united region. The EU also encourages people, especially youth, to learn multiple European languages. Its goal is for all Europeans to learn 2 languages in addition to their home language. Sometimes, cultural diversity can become a centrifugal force that the EU must work to overcome. The EU celebrates the diversity of languages in Europe, yet those many languages can sometimes make communication difficult. To overcome communication barrier, EU must translate all of its speeches and documents into 24 languages. In 2016 alone, the EU had to translate more than 2.2 million pages. Other centrifugal forces work against a shared cultural identity. National pride is one of them, as countries have a hard time putting interests of all Europe above their national interests. Competition and rivalries between countries can make cooperation a challenge. Cultural traditions sometimes clash even at EU headquarters. For example, traditional Czech foods are often cooked slowly, tasting even better the next day. However, EU rules for its cafeteria state that cooked food cannot be served if it is more than 2 hours old. One Czech citizen complained that this will make many of our best dishes illegal. Example also, this picture here, bullfighting is a cultural tradition in Spain. Every year, matadors kill thousands of bulls in bullfights. But in other European countries, people view bullfighting as cruel and think that it should be banned. In this lesson, we learned about the European Union. The EU is built on supranational cooperation. You read about centripetal forces that work towards such cooperation, but you also read about centrifugal forces that work against unity. The EU is the best example of supranational cooperation in the world today. It works because its member countries have been willing to give up some power, but just how much power remains is an issue. Some Europeans want the EU to become a United States of Europe, whereas others fear giving up any more power to the European Union. That is all that we have for today for Lesson 14. Next time will be Lesson 15, talking about population dilemmas in Europe. There's a worksheet ready for you to go, and I will see you tomorrow.